Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. You've sent in some really helpful stuff for us to take a look at. Whole bunch of blog excerpts all about different business labels, and it can get kind of confusing.
It really can.
Yeah. So today, we're going to cut through all that confusion. LLC, S-Corp, C-Corp, sole proprietorship. What does it all mean? We'll pull out what's important, what you absolutely got to know if you're starting a business or thinking about growing one.
And it really is crucial.
Yeah, because, the way you set things up legally has a huge impact down the line. I mean, we're talking about liability, we're talking about taxes, and just how your business operates day to day, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about paperwork. It's about setting the right foundation. One thing that's interesting, and your sources touch on this, is how business size often lines up with the legal structure. So they define small businesses as under 100 employees. And these guys often use structures like sole proprietorships, LLCs, partnerships. Think like your local coffee shop, that independent bookstore down the street. They're often running with those simpler setups.
Yeah, the kind of place where you might see the owner working the register. Okay, so then we step up to medium-sized businesses, what your sources define as 100 to 499 employees. More formal structures start showing up. LLCs, S-Corps, maybe that regional catering company with a couple locations, a mid-sized software company, something like that. They've grown a bit. They need something a bit more structured.
Exactly. Those are the businesses that are moving on to that next level. And then, of course, we get to the big leagues, the large businesses, 500 employees or more. Your sources are spot on when they say C corporations rule this space. These are your major national, international companies, right? Facing more complex regulations and, as we'll discuss, looking at different ways to raise capital.
All right, let's break all this down a bit further, starting with the LLC, the limited liability company. This one seems to be pretty popular. For good reason. Your sources describe it as a hybrid structure. What do they mean by that?
So that hybrid part is super important. It gives you the liability protection you'd expect with a corporation, but with the tax flexibility of a partnership.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, the real gem is that limited liability protection. It basically shields your personal assets, things like your house, your savings, from any debts or lawsuits that hit the LLC itself. Huge peace of mind for any entrepreneur.
So let's say the business runs into trouble, racks up debt, maybe gets sued. Your personal finances are generally safe. That's going to feel like a huge weight off your shoulders.
It can. It can. It lets you take those calculated risks without putting everything on the line.
The sources also mentioned tax flexibility. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Sure thing. By default, the IRS doesn't tax an LLC as a separate entity. Instead, the profits and losses, too, they pass through directly to the owners on their personal tax returns. So you dodge that double taxation we'll talk about with C-Corp. But, and here's the flexibility, an LLC doesn't have to stick with this. It can actually choose to be taxed as an S-Corp or even a C-Corp if that makes more sense financially as the business grows.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation with taxes.
Got it. Now, setting up an LLC, the information you provided makes it seem like a pretty straightforward process, right?
Yeah, generally it is a bit less complicated than incorporating. The blog excerpts you shared outline the basic steps. You pick a business name, make sure it follows your state's rules, file something called Articles of Organization with the state. That's your official registration. And then, while it's not always required legally, create an operating agreement is just a good idea. It's kind of like a rule book for your LLC, spells out ownership, how decisions get made, how profits and losses are split between members. Can really prevent headaches later on. And then, last but not least, you've got to snag the necessary permits and licenses.
Right. Can't forget about those. Got to be legit. Okay, so in simple terms, who's the LLC best for?
If we think back to those business sizes, small to medium-sized businesses benefit the most. They want the liability protection, but they don't need all the formality of a corporation. Great option for entrepreneurs who value that tax flexibility, simpler management structure. All right, they probably need all the flexibility they can get. So we've tackled LLCs. Let's shift gears to the S-Corp. The source material you provided defines this as a corporation that elects for pass-through taxation. How does this differ from an LLC opting to be taxed like an S-Corp? It sounds a bit confusing, I gotta admit.
I know. It can be a tricky difference. So an LLC can choose to be taxed like an S-Corp, but a traditional S-Corp, it starts as a corporation from day one. So you go through the formal process of incorporating, which means filing articles of incorporation with the state. Then the S-Corp makes this specific election with the IRS using Form 2553 to be taxed under Subchapter S of the tax code. There's a deadline too. got to do this within 75 days of incorporating for it to count for the current tax year. So yeah, both can get that pass-through taxation, but the structure itself and all those ongoing admin requirements, they're different.
I see. It's like the S-Corp is playing by a different rule book from the get-go.
Exactly. And operating as an S-Corp can sometimes give you a bit more street cred with customers or investors. Your sources actually point this out, simply because it is a formal corporate structure. And just like an LLC and a C-Corp, it offers that limited liability protection, which is always a good thing.
So let's say someone wants to go the S-Corp route. What are the essential steps involved? Sounds like there's more to it than with an LLC.
There is more hoops to jump through for sure. As we mentioned, first you've got to file those articles of incorporation. Then comes that crucial step of filing Form 2x53 with the IRS to choose that S-Corp status, remembering that 75-day deadline. Then you need to draft corporate bylaws, basically the ground rules for how the corporation operates internally. And another difference from LLCs, S-Corp have to hold those initial board meetings and regular ones after that and keep minutes of everything discussed. So yeah, a bit more formal record keeping compared to the flexibility of an LLC.
More meetings, more paperwork. Sounds like the fun never ends.
Well, it is part of the process, keeping things organized and official.
True, true. So, who benefits the most from this S-Corp setup?
This is where the stage of a business and how profits are distributed really matter. Your sources suggest established companies with decent growth that plan to distribute profits regularly to their shareholders. They tend to benefit the most from an S-Corp. It can be good tax-wise for S-Corp owners actively working in the business, too. Since they're considered employees of the corporation, they can take a reasonable salary. Any remaining profits, those can be taken as dividends, which can mean savings on self-employment taxes. So a big draw for many. It's that combo of limited liability, the image of a corporation, and these tax perks that appeals to businesses as they mature.
Makes sense. They've gotten past that initial startup phase. They're looking at consistent profits. They want to make sure they're being smart about taxes. Okay, on to the one that often sounds the most intimidating, the C-Corp. Your sources point out this double taxation thing. What exactly does that mean, and what is a C-Corp anyway?
A C-Corp is your standard traditional corporation. Legally and tax-wise, it's totally separate from its owners, the shareholders. And that separation is why you get the potential for double taxation. First, the C-Corp itself pays corporate income tax on its profits. Then, when those profits get paid out to shareholders as dividends, guess what? The shareholders have to pay income tax on that dividend income. So, yep, same profits taxed twice, once at the corporate level, once at the individual level.
Double taxation. Yikes. Doesn't sound too appealing. So why would anyone choose to set up a C-Corp in the first place? The source material mentions unlimited growth potential. Is that the main reason?
That's a big one, absolutely. C-Corps have a few advantages. They can issue different kinds of stock, common stock, preferred stock, and so on. They can have unlimited shareholders, too. This makes them really attractive for businesses that wanted to raise big money through stock sales. Think expansion, major research and development, acquisitions. We're talking venture capital here. That's almost exclusively C-Corp territory because of this stock structure. And can't forget that strong liability protection for shareholders. Since the corporation is separate legally, shareholders' personal assets are generally protected from the corporation's debts and legal issues. And while double taxation is a factor, the sources also point out C-Corp can get more tax deductions and write-offs for expenses, which can help balance the tax burden.
So if you're thinking big, aiming for those huge investment rounds, or maybe even going public someday, C-Corp is probably the way to go, huh? What about actually setting one up? Even more complex than an S-Corp.
Yeah, it's a more involved process for sure. First, you got to file articles of incorporation with the state, and this document's got to have all the specifics about the company's stock, the share types, the initial ownership structure. Corporate bylaws are essential. Think of them as the detailed rule book for the corporation. You need to get all the federal, state, and local licenses and permits, too. And C-Corp, they're required to have those official initial shareholder meetings to elect directors, set up the governance, then regular board meetings. Got to keep records of everything.
Lots of moving parts. Definitely sounds like it's got to be the right kind of business to handle all that.
It does. You've got to be ready for that level of structure and compliance.
All right, we've covered more complex structures. Let's wrap up with the simplest one of all. The sole proprietorship. Basically, one person owns and runs the show. The sources describe it as no legal separation between the owner and the business, right?
Exactly. It's the most direct way to start a business. Minimal paperwork, low startup costs, makes it super accessible. For the owner, the big thing to understand is what's called direct taxation. Any profits, you just report them on your personal tax return. Losses can offset your other income, too. Really simplifies taxes.
Sounds like you can pretty much just get to work. What steps do you actually need to take?
The blogs you sent in lay out a few basic steps. First, you choose your business name. If you're using a name other than your legal name, you'll probably need to register a Doing Business As name, DBA, with your city or state. Got to get those licenses and permits too, whatever's required for your specific business. And even though it's the simplest structure, accurate accounting from the start is key so you can track your income and expenses for those taxes.
Organization is always a good thing, even if it's the simplest setup.
Right, sets you up for success down the road.
Absolutely. So who's the sole proprietorship best suited for? It sounds like it's tailor-made for folks just starting their entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, that's a big one. The sources highlight individual entrepreneurs starting small, testing a new idea, not a lot of personal risk involved. It's also common for freelancers, independent contractors, consultants, basically people providing services who don't have major costs or potential liabilities. That simple setup and the way income and expenses flow directly to their personal tax return make it attractive.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot. LLCs, they're all about that balance of flexibility and liability protection. S-Corps are for those established businesses aiming for pass-through taxation within a corporate framework, those possible self-employment tax benefits. C-Corps are for businesses aiming for the stars, thinking about big investments, even going public, despite the whole double taxation thing. And sole proprietorships, they're all about simplicity and direct taxation, perfect for those entrepreneurs just starting out. It really shows how important it is to pick the right structure for your goals, right?
Couldn't agree more. Your sources emphasize understanding these different structures is all about letting you make informed decisions. It's about finding the structure that fits your business model, your risk tolerance, your current and future tax situation, how much you want to grow.
So to wrap things up, you, our amazing listener, you gave us these blog excerpts all about different business structures. We took a deep dive into what we think are the most important parts of LLCs, S-Corps, C-Corps, and sole proprietorships. Hopefully it's a bit clearer now what the differences are, what it all means for you.
Yeah, we really tried to break it down. As you think about your next steps, keep in mind what we talked about. How important is that personal liability protection right now? What are the tax implications going to look like, both short-term and long-term? How big do you dream of making your business? All these questions are going to help you choose the best structure for you.
So, as you're thinking about all that, thinking about the risks you're taking on, where you want your business to go, which structure feels right for you right now, what questions do you have after hearing all this? It's definitely worth giving it some serious thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, exploring all these different business structures. It's been fun.
Absolutely.
See you next time.